All right. Welcome to Give Black, Give Back Conversations. We host this conversation to explore the many facets of Black philanthropy and how philanthropy impacts the Black community. I am your co host, Kia Jarmon, and I'm joined by my wonderful co conspirator in justice, Lisa Swift-Young. Hello, Lisa. Tell us.
Hi, how's everybody? Hello.
Let's do a quick check in. What's on your heart right now?
Ooh, so that's a lot. This happens to be Black History Month. So if you're listening to this later, that's cool. But this is sort of a moment that I usually take to reflect on successes and of the African diaspora. So this month I've read the 1619 Project. So Nicole Hannah-Jones piece, as well as Nelson Mandela's The Long Walk to Freedom. And both of them are really very interesting on how they address some of the successes that we've had in our community, as well as talking specifically about philanthropy and how that works. Nelson Mandela does a good job of talking about philanthropy from the diaspora and how socialism and how we've always given back as a community. And so that was one of those things to just really hear that perspective of how he grew up and how things happened and how that kind of worked. And then when we're talking about Nicole Hannah-Jones, about how philanthropy was sort of there before. So, in the 1619 Project, she talks about it's the original origin story. That's her verbiage from that standpoint. And so we talk a little bit about how from the continent, we already had that sort of giving perspective, and how people, when they first were enslaved and brought here, they still had that sort of philanthropy. And so really understanding that give black, give back is really a legacy from the diaspora, and that affirmation that Nelson Mandela shares in his autobiography. And then to have those two pieces read at the same time was really very interesting, and gave me a lot of two very strong and powerful people who did the work and who are doing the work, and how this give black, give back is really a continuation and out of respect to our ancestors, and sort of setting that in that foundation has really been something that for this Black History Month, I really want to embrace.
Yeah. As you were talking about this being the gift from the diaspora, I like that. We should coin that phrase. I just purchased one of our colleagues' books, Dr. Tyrone McKinley Freeman, and hosted a talk with him a while back, and he said that our ancestors brought philanthropy over during that transatlantic slave passage. It was one of the very few things that they were able to bring with them in terms of because everything had been stripped from them, identity included. And so that philanthropy piece goes back far before 1619, far before our origin story in this country, but it is also really important to have that origin story in this country. But that's not what's on my mind. What's on my mind this week has been, I was talking to a friend. There's a guy that we both knew probably 20 years ago that passed away unexpectedly. And my friend sent me the GoFundMe page because the family unexpectedly lost this person. And I also unexpectedly at the top of the year lost one of my best friends. And so immediately when that happened, less than 40 years old, I immediately went to start working on my will. And my will, my living will, and the subsequent documents. And the GoFundMe piece, you and I've talked about that from time to time, about that's really a lot of our, we have a lot of reasons why we do this, and that being one of them, to make sure people have the right resources and tools. And I began working on my will. I'm using a site called freewill.com. Now, they're not a sponsor. I'm not advocating for people using them, but I started using it because it gives a template. And in the template, it's challenging because you are thinking about end of life while you're hopefully in the middle of your life. And one of the areas is about philanthropy, one of the areas that they let you fill out. And so my philanthropic gift was listed as Give Black, Give Back, because it is really important to me that even in transitioning, that there is that piece where I'm not just keeping, keep taking it all with me, that I'm able to leave something behind. So that's really what's been on my mind this past.
That's super interesting. I think you bring up a really good point. One of the things that we talk about specifically in Give Black, Give Back is about that economic stability that, we want to make sure we have. And I know, in my TED, we talk a little bit about, legacy is what you live, not what you leave, right? So having that whole conversation about legacy, sometimes we're, in the diaspora, sometimes talking about death means we feel like it's going to bring it on, right? So we want people to realize it's not going to bring it on because you talk about it. It's actually going to happen regardless of whether you talk about it or not.
Right.
But I think having the maturity and having that next level sets the foundation for not only you, but for your son and for the next generation. And that's what Give Black is really all about, is about this. So this legacy philanthropy is about this long game, right? Nelson Mandela talks about like the biographical, he plays the long game the entire time. Like he's consciously thinking about the next generation while he's in this generation. So he is literally, living a legacy that, he's living the legacy. And so when and I think that's important for people to understand, is like Black people in particular, we don't talk about wills and trusts and things like that because there's some stigma around it. But that is literally how we're going to advance and how we're going to move forward as a community is really setting that foundation. So great, to you. I think that's, I want people to really get that, because there's so much that we've lost land that way. We've lost so many things that, we could all be having a different conversation if people could get on board with, like, we are going to transition at some point, and planning for it does not bring it on. We need to embrace that piece. So
no, absolutely. I mean, but let me say this. I don't want you to skip over the TED Talk. So talk about that for just a half a second, right? Because people don't necessarily know that you've done the TEDx Talk. So, so give the headline, and then we'll make sure that in the show notes that we put a link to that, because it's that particular talk is, I believe, very critical to this conversation that we're having. So that may be like, this is the 1.0, that's the 2.0. So people need to be listening to that next.
So the talk is, if you guys are familiar with the story of Sandra Bland, this will all make sense. If you haven't, then Google it and you'll find out from that standpoint. But my mom's name is Sandra as well. And so for me, that had it hit in a different way. Also, my mother is I shouldn't say was, she's still very much active, is a civil rights leader. In that sense, the family was listed as the most arrested civil rights family in 1965, a title they are very, very proud to tell you. So there is no shame at all in getting arrested. It's like, but Sandra's story and my mom Sandra's story intersected at that arrest, right? My mom was arrested several times, obviously a lot, and her family was arrested, but Sandra Bland was arrested that fateful day. And partly because there's a whole bunch of things that happened that went wrong that day. So I'm going to be clear, there's a bunch of stuff that went wrong that day. But one of those things was that she was not able to post bail. And that $500, I feel like, cost her life. And so for me, financial independence and economic stability was super important. So the talk kind of walks through transitioning people from charity, helping someone in the moment, to helping someone build momentum with philanthropy. And philanthropy is really the long game. Again, going back to that whole conversation about, it makes us feel good in the moment for charity, and we feel good, but we didn't really do anything to help the person out of the situation. We kind of helped them in it, and it made us feel good, but we didn't help them out of it. And so philanthropy to me is that sort of savoring giving in a way that is a longer term benefit, where you can actually see, or that the person who is in need actually gets the benefit and kind of comes out of that situation. So the talk is why you should start savor giving under my name and TEDx. So if take a look at it, as 7 minutes, I think. But you hear the story, and you also hear about how I got into the philanthropy game officially through that process and the foundation that my family sort of created. So that's sort of the TED Talk in 45 seconds. So
yeah, I was gonna say, don't give it all away. Don't give it all. You want to the TED Talk for sure. So we've been kind of circling around Give Black, Give Back, because of course the name of this conversation is Give Black, Give Back. But we also founded and serve as philanthropy advisors for Give Black, Give Back as a fund as well. And this Black Philanthropy Initiative is in collaboration with the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee. We have a three-pronged mission. So we kind of talked about it, but just to make it really clear, we serve as a resource, an amplifier of the Black-led funds, Black endowed funds at the Community Foundation. There are many, and we're excited about that. We also support the efforts of nonprofits that are run by and support the Black community. And then we also provide access and education, hello, to the community on how to build, sustain their philanthropy in order to strengthen our economy. And you heard Lisa talk about that economy piece, because that's the long game. When we're talking about philanthropy, we're talking about really strengthening our foundation, our economy with each other.
So, one of the things in particular that, we started this foundation we started this whole process. The Give Black, Give Back was not, it kind of evolved. As God does things, he moves things for places that you don't necessarily know where they're going, and you just kind of go along for the ride, which for me has served me well when I take the ride and don't try to fight the ride, right? So we partnered together to share. One of the things in particular that Key and I found was really interesting. I'm sort of the researcher person, not that Key is not, but I'm sort of that piece. But African Americans as a community in this country give $11 billion a year in charitable giving. So that number is massive. And when we start talking about, companies, we start talking about companies don't have that evaluation. And so $11 billion is a ton of money for us to sort of, and we're not necessarily as African Americans seen as givers. We're always seen as receivers. We're always seen as people who always are in need. But to look at that level and say, okay, we're giving $11 billion a year, and one of the things in particular is I did some research. There's organizations out there that said we could literally end hunger with $11 billion. So like that number is huge, and it's a number that we need to coalesce around. And so philanthropy, but we're giving it charitably. And charity, as I mentioned before, is like this emotional feeling that you do it and it's for the moment. But philanthropy, if we were to focus that money in a way that was more to fixing a problem instead of sustaining a problem, what would the world be like? And so Give Black, Give Back, it sort of kind of came out of that process of if we could take that lesson from our ancestors of philanthropy and really blow this thing out, what would we be living differently? And then another thing that we found was that only 1% of the, we hear about all this great money that goes out and people get, X amount of dollars and millions of dollars. Only 1% of that money ends up with Black-led funds. So the money's not coming our way in the droves that we think. We get the big headlines are there, but they're actually not there. So we also look at, we also want to celebrate the 5 T's, which we call them: time, talent, treasures, truth, and testimony. And we'll talk about that a little bit more at length, but there's so many ways that you can be a philanthropist. And I think media has sort of co-opted that word to sort of mean you have to be wealthy. And the wealth that we have with that $11 billion clearly shows we have wealth. We just need to sort of look at it in a way that's more, game changing and changing the system. And so Give Black, Give Back is really about that process of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I call this our commercial break, but it's not really, it's an active commercial. Stay tuned, right? I want us to highlight one of the organizations, one of the nonprofits that we see come through Give Black, Give Back that we have talked to in the past. And so I want to highlight From Your Father Incorporated. It's a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide resources that help fatherless families achieve a future of wholeness. Every month, Middle Tennessee families receive more than just a box full of necessities. They also receive an out-of-the-box experience, from organic produce for healthy meals to a handwritten note of encouragement on each box. There's something for everyone. Families are encouraged to save money and in case of emergency, that will make sense in a moment, spend quality time together in a safe environment, and heal the spirit with Zoom calls that benefit the mind, body, and soul. What distinguishes this organization from others is that families are not required to come to them. Instead, they go to the families, they deliver the boxes to the doorstep. The boxes aren't all the same. Each one is custom filled with the family's wants and needs in mind, reducing waste and allergic reactions. And so I'd like to make sure that if you want to be highlighted in this particular nonprofit highlight section, that you email our wonderful partner at the Community Foundation, Audra Cox, and that's at Audra, AUDRA, at CFMT.org. So, and to learn more about a nonprofit like this one or others, you can go to blackgivingback.com. What I like is that they are thinking not just about the supplemental items, which are those things as Lisa has talked about, that's right where you are today, but also thinking about future. And so Lisa and I both sit and talk a lot about charity versus philanthropy, because even in the description and how organizations, 501c3 organizations or funds and foundations, even how you set up, it's a charitable organization. It's a charitable gift. That language has resonated, over and over and over again. And so sometimes we don't think about philanthropy in that unless you look a certain way, unless your name's on the side of a building, unless you have a last name that has a lineage that you can track for further than a few generations. So that is how we get to this conversation. So Lisa, share a little bit more about charity versus philanthropy.
Okay, so one of the things in particular when we start talking about charity versus philanthropy, there's a couple different differences that I would like to sort of highlight in particular. And one in particular is, charity, as I talked about before, is more of an emotional giving directed at crisis. So we're talking about a crisis situation, we're familiar with, we see someone on the street and we see they're in crisis, they need money, they need food, they're impaired in need, and you want to give those things. Those are things that innately are things that we do as human beings, and our humanity sort of calls us to do those things. And so that's sort of where the charity piece comes out. But those things tend to be temporary, right? We're not really looking to, we're constantly sending money to this person. We also have, for those of us who have family members that you're constantly needing to support them in some way, but their situation doesn't actually evolve, from that standpoint. The money also is focused on the victim and not the cause. So we're looking at the victim and we're saying, okay, I see you in this situation. We want to take care of you, in situations of abuse. We obviously want to focus on the victim, but we're not looking at how do we address getting her or him out of that situation. And so the cause of what caused this particular situation to happen. And then also we expect some type of immediate response. We want some type of immediate feeling from it. We're looking for, I do this, I feel good, I sign off, I take the picture with the big check, and then things go to normal. I go back to my regular normal life and I continue on the same path until I see the next cycle. So it's like this very cyclic approach. But when we talk about philanthropy, this is more of a strategic giving, and we're looking at the root cause, taking the time to be okay, how do we end up here? Obviously, we want to deal with, food, clothing, and shelter, safety, those types of things immediately. But we also want to take a look at, okay, what was the root cause? After we sort of stabilize, let's take the time to be okay, what caused this situation? How do we figure it out? Then we're also looking for a long-term solution to structural barriers. So this is where we sort of get into the justice piece, where it's what are the barriers that cause this situation? And how do we change the legislation? How do we change laws? How do we change, administrations? How do we change, the entire structure of the way this even allowed this situation to even happen? I mentioned I read, Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. So his game was a long-term game. How do we change apartheid? How do we end apartheid? Yes, you can help people who are dealing with different situations, but the apartheid system was what needed to be structurally changed. And that was more of a justice thing. And also we're looking for systemic issues. And then we're looking at, again, it's a long-term game. It's a measure to solve societal problems. So when we talk about what's your intent when you give, charity versus philanthropy, here's the thing. I'm not saying that charity, we definitely, there are situations where we all need to focus on the person in the moment and be there. And those are obvious things. But when you're thinking about philanthropy, you're thinking about more what Kia was talking about, long term, like how's her son going to, subsist? How's her aunties, uncles, brothers, cousins, really looking at, like, I'm helping them now, but how do I sort of get them to the space where they can sort of do that? I don't know, Kia, any other things that you feel like are really helpful in that space?
Oh yeah, I could talk about this all the time. I really try to give folks to focus on justice versus charity, to even go the step further, right? So when you have a philanthropic system that works really well, incorporating those 5 T's, which again we'll get to in just a moment, thinking about the wholeness of a person, the humanity of a person, then there's justice on the other side of that. Because we're allowing people to determine the need that they have. We're working against the systems and the problem and the power structures to do something to fix that. And then on the other side is a more just society. There are real reasons why charity, in particular, why Black people have been seen as charity. And what I always encourage is for people to really go back, whatever industry you're in. I talk a lot about the education system or the medical industry. It's a lot sometimes in the work that I do. I'm talking about those things. In the education system in particular, it would be incumbent upon people to have a conversation about why HBCUs were funded the way that they were funded. And when I ask my students when they come into my session, I say, why do you think that names like Carnegie and others would give to a Black institution? For so long, people weren't able, of course, to be able to read and write and go to school and get educated. And there's a lot of really great answers that come out of it. But one of the answers that's really important is because that's how you manage the labor.
Mm-hmm.
When I put you in the education system and I share what classes can happen, I create which structures are available, which degree programs, then I can control the labor for it. And so we don't think sometimes about how in the name of philanthropy, we are often just doing charity, which makes us feel good. Charity really is about making the person feel good. Every faith has some charitable conversation in their doctrine, whatever document they use to guide and abide by. But really at the core, in particular in this country, but also on the banks of the continent of Africa, of West Africa in particular, where our ancestors were taken from, there are so many moments that in the name of philanthropy, this is why we steal people and bring them to a foreign land in the name of church and philanthropy. And so we're not necessarily going to get into all of that today, but at some point we will, because it's important to have that conversation, particularly we're based in the South. And that is very much a part of many of our origin stories, is something around our benevolence in relationship to our faith. And so it's an important conversation to be having with your families. It's an important conversation to be having with your children. We have one of our favorite people in the city, Courtney and Ever Hale. They have a fund in honor of Tia Hale, which is Ever, who's a young person, her mother, who unfortunately passed away. But in our house, we have the Knowledge Bank, which Courtney and Ever have continued to work on. And one of the areas is the share box. So we share that, we put our money in there to share with other people. And so I'm able to talk to my son about why it's important, not just to give again for that moment, but to give and be thinking about the long-term effect of how we can support people. So philanthropy, what we've tried to do with Give Black, Give Back in particular, is to expand people's understanding of philanthropy. Your name doesn't have to be on the side of the building. Go ahead, Lisa.
No, so here's a piece. So I want to double back just a little bit, because there was an article I'm gonna pass over to our team that's behind the scenes, and I don't know if she's gonna be able to get this put up before, but and my brains, forgive me, you guys, you're gonna see this a lot. Like I'll do stuff and be like, so there was an article that Forbes put out just recently, and it talks about HBCUs and how they were cheated out of billions of dollars. And so we're here based here in Nashville, and I'll have to scroll to the particular area to get the numbers right, because the numbers are staggering and appalling. And so if you don't think that giving philanthropy wise is important, and how important that is, and how that story has been conscripted by how much money was given and how much money was held back, then this will definitely shock you. So Tennessee State has been shorted, based upon this particular study that was done recently, and this is printed in Forbes, so you guys can read the information in here, about $1.9 billion. And so Kia pointed out the fact that sometimes money is given and we get the big story, like, oh, X amount of, there's a lot of money going around at HBCUs, and, HBCUs should be able to make it. And why are Black people still asking for things? Because, and this is since 1987. So we're not even talking about since its inception. Since 1987, compared to their other state funded schools. So these are land grant schools that should be funded by the state equally and equitably, but that's not the case. Tennessee State here in Nashville, $1.9 billion. North Carolina A&T, which is my son's alma mater, $2.7 billion. So when we talk about giving to HBCUs and we talk about doing that piece and having that philanthropy piece, that is, to her point, it's been conscripted a little bit. And it's sort of like, oh, they're getting all this money. They should be able to do this. They should be do that. But when you shorted someone, that kind of, I mean, we're talking billion, right? So, and if that $11 billion that we give every year, if we were more focused on it, that money could have been a little bit differently. So that's what we're talking about, these game-changing opportunities that we have through philanthropy. So, that piece with the knowledge bank, like getting your kids to really understand what that looks like and how to do that more intentionally, and not from the standpoint of this makes me feel good today, but this is how my kids, my grandkids, my kids will have an opportunity to do some things to address these issues. And when we talk about philanthropy, get into the structural stuff, like how do we go to our legislators and be like, I want you to look at this and explain to me why Tennessee State is such a deficiency in their funding, because it affects the way that our families will move forward, and for generations, to Kia's point, like it conscripts how we function and the funding that we get. So I could talk about HBCUs, of course, all day, but
again, that's also how charity works, mm-hmm. right? Is that it dangles the carrot that you never get full off of. And that's exactly what, when you're talking about the amounts of money that have been given, but yet the amount of money that's been held back is still the dangled carrot that you can never get full off of. And then if you can't get full, you certainly can't advance and help someone else. Because what we know about strong philanthropy, when it's done with a community spirit, which is that collective consciousness, when it's done that way, what we see is that people will then give, once they're out of their situation, they will then also become givers, because now they're in a position to do the give back. But again, I just challenge our listeners, our viewers, those who are paying attention, think about why the narrative is always that Black individuals are the receivers, as Lisa pointed out in the beginning, and not givers. And I had this situation come up recently. I've had it come up actually several times with organizations where when an organization is creating their fund development or their fundraising process, they don't consider Black people as a part of, they don't create a strategy around Black giving. They create a strategy around how to give to the Black community, but not how to receive. And again, there's not just, the $11 billion is very startling. It's a huge number. The frequency in which we give has also been proven to be in higher amounts. The proportion of our percentage of our income that we give is also higher than other communities. And so we know all of those things to be true, but there also, if you read reports like the Nielsen report about how much we spend as consumers, we have access to money. It's a matter of where that money goes, right? And so that's what we're talking about here. So let's get into, because we talked about philanthropy and we talked about the 5 T's, like in terms of the kind of cursory version, but I want to make sure people really understand the 5 T's and how it fits into their life. So time, talent, treasure, truth, and testimony. So, one thing I ask people, many people serve on boards of directors, right? And oh, thank you. So the 5 T's of Give Black, Give Back, Black philanthropy. A lot of people give their time to organizations. So you serve on a nonprofit board, and you probably have some type of financial or physical note as well that you are supposed to present to the organization to serve on that particular board. But how often do you get an end of year statement about how much time you've spent? Our time can never be duplicated. Our money can, right? You would hear Lisa talk about, what is it, Lisa? I've actually incorporated that into my life. The 80, what is it called? The 70-40 rule? What's the rule?
Oh, the rule of 72?
Rule of 72. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
We can talk about
a whole nother conversation. That's like
yes. And we may have a whole conversation about the rule of 72. I've been actually using that because it's been very helpful in me looking at ways and funds I want to actually contribute to double my money or to make more money. But we can make more money. I mean, you can sell things on eBay or Poshmark, or you can sell things on Facebook Marketplace, or you can go work 3 or 4 jobs. I'm not encouraging those things. I'm just saying that you can always get more money. But time is something that is so incredibly precious. And in particular, when you think about how you're negotiating time with other things. So for me, my negotiation is, if I'm on here today, although it's school hours, if I'm doing this in the evening, I'm negotiating my time with my son. And that is a huge piece I don't want to negotiate with an organization or with a place that is not going to be supporting philanthropy in its fullness. So time is one of them. It is one of our most valued parts of who we are. Talent is next. So the way that philanthropy is often taught or talked about is as if your talent, so meaning either what you do for your 9 to 5, or even your 5 to 9, if you've got a side business or some other thing that you do, or even the talent that you've never been known for, but you want to be known for, you want people to see. We often make it as if there is some distinction between the two, but you're a whole person. So your talent, again, who you are, the humanity in your identity, is also a part of your philanthropy. I think about talent as it relates to, for my industry in communications, I think about the mentoring that I've done of young people or people who are looking to get into the industry. My talent is supporting them. My talent is knowing how I have a particular skill, and I can also share that skill with someone else. That is also a part of my philanthropy, because if I gift them with my talents, then hopefully they will live out their own legacy through that, right? So you see how it's all the language we've been talking today starts to make sense. Time, talent, of course, treasure. So treasure is the money, but it's also other things. I don't want people to just think about it as liquid cash. It's also, as I was talking about, leaving something in my will. So it's about that legacy. It's about pledges or endowments that can happen over a particular amount of time. It's about creating, you might have stocks or bonds that you leave to an organization, or you leave to continue to fulfill the mission of whatever fund you have or whatever work you're doing. So treasure could be more expanded than just the physical dollar you have today. And then truth and testimony, I put those to some degree together. Truth is really where Lisa and I are actively having conversations, not just here, but also in the community, about the truth of philanthropy versus charity, and not just letting us continue what I would say are the myths or or just to be blunt about it, the lies about how charity is supposed to somehow help the Black community. We are out here actively telling the truth. As people would often say, speaking truth to power. We're really trying to make sure that we're dismantling the ideals that people have about the Black community and making sure that we amplify and profess the excellence of our Black community. That is truth telling through and through. We will continue to do that even if people feel uncomfortable, even if people feel that what we're saying or how we're saying it is not the way that they would want it to be said. We're saying this to make sure that we don't have to keep having this conversation when my son, who's 7, becomes my age. We shouldn't still be having these conversations. And then testimony is also what we do on this platform. So if you've tuned in to any of our previous episodes where we have interviewed all types of people, what you'll know is that I was thinking about, thank you for that, for putting that visual up, Lisa. I have notes here. This is going to be really weird, but and if you're listening, you can't see it. It's on a napkin. Because sometimes when I'm sitting at my desk, I have tons of paper on my desk. I keep all little kind of notes and things like that. I have stickies and everything, but these are the notes from Belay Fullwood. Belay Fullwood being one of the co-creators of Black Philanthropy Month. And I keep it here and I haven't transferred it because there are just so many good notes. I don't want to miss anything. And so I like to keep it here. But the title of her talk, even though this wasn't the title, I call it The Modesty of Black Philanthropy. That's because she talks about that and she wrote about that in her book. And how that relates to our testimony is that very often in the Black community, a lot of our history is oral. Mm-hmm. So, and you think about this relative to your family, your grandparents or that great aunt or so forth, and you hear these stories. And of course, over time, the stories sometimes are bigger, sometimes they are more salacious. I mean, there are all kinds of ways in which stories are told. It has been Lisa and I's responsibility to our community to help people to memorialize their testimony. And so that's why we come on this platform and we make sure that we document the stories so that we don't have revisionist history happening 100 years from now or 20 years from now, where people can make up things. We are documenting the testimonies of people in our community, ourselves included, so that the story is told in its fullness and in its excellence. So those are our 5 T's, and we live by those, and we hope that, of course, other people will too. Lisa, I know you have several things to add because this is something we talk about so often. So please share.
So I think the thing is, that inclusivity, right? So, I'm going to keep going back to Long Walk to Freedom because that was what I just went through from that standpoint. But that whole, Ubuntu spirit, I am because we are, right? So that the continental piece that is sort of very basic for us and very visceral for us. And so we want to be inclusive. And so when we talk about philanthropy, again, that's a big word that has been co-opted to be something that is not. And so when we talk about time, treasure, talents, truth, and testimony, we want to make it inclusive because that is culturally who we are. We are very inclusive and we want to include everyone. So everyone has an opportunity to give in a very, I like what Kia said, collective consciousness, right? To be intentional about living a legacy while you're living and how to do that. And for me, that's what philanthropy really is. It's that savoring giving and really having this piece of being, collective. And so the reason that we've expanded that out because we feel like it's ours, right? We feel like philanthropy belongs to the continent, which we are from the continent. So we feel like, that we can kind of give the definition that we want. So I think so many times we're given the definition and someone else gets to ascribe that to like what that means. We're going to take that word and sort of blow it out so that everyone has a way. So whether or not you make $10,000, a month, or you make $2 a month, then you still have a way to be able to give back because you have value and you have a legacy, whatever that legacy is you want to leave. And we want to make sure that it's open enough to where you feel like you're included. And so that's why the 5 T's are, that truth and testimony, being honest. I've had conversations with people recently that when you are vulnerable in that truth and you're telling your truth, some people might not like it. It is what it is. But I think it definitely brings people more there are so many other people who have the same challenges or same opportunities or same struggles or obstacles, whatever. And I think us telling those things are super important. So the 5 T's are really meant to be inclusive because our community is inclusive. And so, yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's so many ways in which you can incorporate these. And I tried to give some while I was talking, but there are so many ways in which you can give or express these in your everyday life, right? It doesn't actually require a lot for you to contribute. And as Lisa said, whether you have a very small amount of money or a small amount of time, or you're wanting to even increase and enhance your talent. Because sometimes there's this delineation between philanthropy and vocation, and sometimes those go together. So if you're also looking to enhance your talent in some way, then you can use philanthropy, whether it's donating your time to a nonprofit in that skill set or what have you. So there's so much that can happen. Okay. You're nearing the end.
We're near the end. This is the thing. We can both talk all day, which, I hope that you guys, you're hearing this one, and there's many other great people. We have a Changemaker series that we go through and we highlight some of the people who have, their testimony. We're capturing their testimony. So I hope you take an opportunity to do that. I don't want to miss anybody's name, so I'm not going to start naming people, all the pieces that you can take a look at, and then conversations that we've had. And we want your feedback as well. So this is we're talking today. Generally, we have a guest here, but we felt like it was really important to sort of have this conversation. But we want to hear your feedback as well. So, whether or not you're in the chat or you're listening to this later, reach out to us. They're on the platform, blackgivingback.com. There's an opportunity for you to share your story. Whether or not this thing started off being a Nashville thing, and we want to obviously honor our roots here in Nashville. But by far, we want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard. So that's more important to us. So if you're in California, if you're in Dubai, if you're in South Africa, wherever you happen to be listening to this, we want to hear your story, because we want to make sure that we are doing a good job of capturing as many stories as we can, because we want to pass them on. So, just feel, and also there's a way to give there as well. So
listen, I was about to
we always gonna be, because we want you to be intentional. We've had a lot of conversations about what has been happening. And if you are ready to have that collective consciousness and give to an organization, that our purpose literally is to make sure that these gifts go to philanthropic organizations. And if you don't know any, and this is a big word, and you don't want to get into it, blackgivingback.com is the way for you to go. And we have the fund is set up there. There's also over 40 some odd funds that are here in the Nashville area that you can participate in as well. So I want to make sure that everyone has an opportunity. This is not so. We talked about that GoFundMe piece, which I'm sure will be a whole nother conversation at some point. Yeah. But we've got to really set a good foundation, and this platform is really the place to do that. So.
Absolutely. You mentioned the Changemakers. I really want people to be watching those Changemakers conversations, because that really is that testimony piece amplified. So please go watch those. We'll put something in the chat for you, but you can also find them. Lisa mentioned that. Before we go, I want us to do a challenge. We talked about charity versus philanthropy today, and we talked about the 5 T's. What is something that we can do to challenge people to be thinking about those things and acting? Because we can do this conversation forever. We will do this conversation as long as we both can. But I also want to make sure that people are challenged to do their own thing. So if you had to give one thing that you wanted them to think about or do, what would that be?
I don't know. That's a really what it's like. The challenge is not that I don't have ideas. It's like, what's one?
Which one? Yeah, I know. If I had said list 5, you'd be like, great, okay. I know you have all the steps laid out. Just one thing, because we're going to give them more things as time goes on, but just one thing.
So here's the thing. I think having a conversation with your family members, I think all of it starts at home, right? So having with your, Kia brought up specifically, the knowledge bank piece of like having a child like understand what, to start giving in that way very intentionally to help someone out of their situation. To me, that's the first thing. It is for you to stop and say, am I helping this person in their situation, or am I helping them out of it? And maybe that calls for you to help them in it right now because they're in a crisis situation. But challenge yourself just to stop. The next person you see at the corner who is asking money for something, or who's doing whatever, whatever, take a moment and understand why you give. Because I always feel like if you get the why first, then you'll start to move forward with that. So I think when you're driving in the car today, 65, 40, 75, wherever you happen to be, across the country, when you see that person in need, understand why you're giving and understand what's your intent. And if your intent is to help them out of the situation, then take the moment to sort of share that moment with your family member and kind of start a dialogue about how you guys can help someone out of that situation. Yeah. That would be the theme today.
Yeah, absolutely. And to, I don't love piggyback, but to expand on that, I asked one time on social media, this is going to sound maybe kind of weird, but I hope it doesn't. I asked one time on social media about arranged marriages. I was asking if any of my friends had gone through arranged marriages, and I had a few. And I had a friend from college who had, who's been arranged in their marriage, and they've been married for a long time. And what she was explaining to me was that when the families are choosing, who to be in relationship with, that they're thinking about 7 generations. Mm-hmm. And so I really want to, and 7 means completion. I really want for our listeners to think about writing down that 1 or 2 sentence legacy that they'd like to live so that the next generation can live for 7 generations. I want them to think about 7 generations, because when you think that long term about your legacy, the responsibility is greater. So the why is so important, figuring out why you give, what is important to you to give, educating people on giving. And then as you do that, write that down so that napkin legacy of sorts, take a piece of paper and write that down, can be passed through the generations. And for 7 generations, the relationship that you all have as a family, or as a community, depending on how you live, is able to live out what you have written down and documented. That is the truth of your philanthropy. So with that, please go to blackgivingback.com. Thank you so much for joining in, and we will see you or talk to you next time.